Okay, so thank you all for joining us today for this webinar on everything you need to know about becoming a peer reviewer for AVS publications. My name is Rachel Bain, and I'm the managing editor for AVS Publications, and I'll be starting out our time today by giving a brief presentation on the peer review process, and then I'll be moderating our panel of experts for a Q&A session on the topic. So your expert panel today consists of Ray Idle from New York University, who is the AVS and Journal of Vacuum Science and Technology Editor-in-Chief, Mohan Sankaran, a JVST Associate Editor from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Stephanie Law, another JVST Associate Editor from Pennsylvania State University, and Alex Shard, who is a Surface Science Spectra Associate Editor from the National Physical Laboratory in the UK. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for being here today. Everyone should be muted, but please feel free to put any questions that you may have throughout the presentation into the Q&A box, and we will be sure to get to those at the end. So on our agenda today, we'll start by going over what exactly peer review is and why it's important to the scholarly publishing process. We will discuss a few different models of peer review, look at an overview of the editorial process and where peer review fits into that, and finally discuss some strategies and considerations to make when completing a peer review. So what is peer review? Peer review is a process by which academic or professional work is evaluated by others who are working in the same field, and it's the most effective way to control the quality of research outputs. Reviewers are the custodians of scientific research and literature who ensure integrity and correctness. Overall, peer review builds trust in the scientific process. From your point of view, being a reviewer helps to enrich your scientific career by offering recognition for your review work through your ORCID number, allowing you to engage with your community, and offering professional development through the collaboration with journal editors to evaluate others' work. The goals of the peer review process explain why it's necessary to employ for scholarly publishing. First and foremost, to prevent the publication of studies that were poorly conceived, designed, or executed, or contain incorrect results. It also helps to ensure that studies are clear and unambiguous and properly give credit to existing research. From an editorial perspective, peer review provides editors with analysis and evidence that they can use to make judgments about publication. And for authors, peer review provides them with constructive feedback to improve the quality and readability of their articles, which benefits them as well as eventual readers. So a nice thing to keep in mind is to advocate for readers when you're reviewing a paper and suggest changes that will improve the reading experience. Overall, peer review helps to maintain the integrity of the scholarly record, but all of this being said, it is not a guarantor of absolute truth and cannot necessarily prevent misconduct in all cases. So there are a handful of different peer review models, but the most commonly used one is single anonymized, which is where authors do not know the identity of reviewers, but reviewers can see the authors of the paper that they're reviewing. And this is the model that's used by AVS journals. Double anonymized simply means that the identity of both reviewers and authors is not known to the other party. And conversely, open peer review is where the identity of all parties is known to everybody. Transparent peer review is where peer review reports are published alongside a manuscript, regardless of the anonymity during the process. And then finally, collaborative peer review is where two or more reviewers work together on a collaborative report, or where authors may work under the supervision of reviewers in order to revise their manuscript. So this is an overview of the editorial process from manuscript submission to publication. And you can see that peer reviewers are at the heart of this process, and this graphic reflects the potential for multiple rounds of review and revision before a manuscript is deemed acceptable for publication. You can also see that at any stage, a manuscript may be recommended for rejection, either for failure to meet journal standards or because reviewers judge that revisions are unacceptable. So what are editors looking for when they receive a manuscript? There are 4 measures that editors use to evaluate manuscripts primarily, and these are scope, quality, novelty, and significance. So first and foremost, an article has to fall under the scope of the journal to which it was submitted. Then an editor has to deem that the quality appears to be high enough to deserve to be reviewed with sufficient execution of research and writing. They will also judge the novelty of the submitted article. So is the study presenting new results, or are there no new advances being presented? And finally, the results presented have to be significant enough to be worth reading. So different journals will have different standards for these categories, but if the editor deems that a submission meets these at their first glance, then they will proceed to send a manuscript out for peer review. When assigning reviewers to a submitted manuscript, editors rely on various criteria and try to identify researchers who are considered to have the right understanding of the field in question and the technical expertise to evaluate the study, its data and conclusions, and who are still active in that field. Editors will also try to select individuals who can provide constructive, fair, and unbiased opinions, and almost most importantly, confirm that they can do so in a sufficient amount of time and return their comments in a timely manner. So when you agree to review a manuscript, you agree to abide by the peer review policies of that journal, which you can usually find on the journal's website. You agree to disclose any conflicts of interest, meaning any connections to the authors or their work that could interfere with your ability to remain unbiased. Again, you agree to do all of these things in a timely manner or communicate delays with the editor. And you agree to be fair, constructive, actionable, and unbiased in your comments. And finally, to review the paper again if needed after revision. So all of that being said, you should decline to review a paper if your answer to any of these questions is no. Do you have the expertise to provide a balanced review of the technical content? Are you free from any conflicts of interest? Do you have the time? If you can't review a paper, we always appreciate suggestions of others who have the appropriate expertise to review. So when completing a review, there are some ethical considerations that should be kept in mind as well. You should not let any preceding reputation of the authors affect your review. You should also be sure to understand the confidentiality policy of the journal. Do not use any information you gain from reviewing a paper to your advantage or to the detriment of others. And finally, you should avoid recommending in excess that authors cite papers that you have authored. As I stated, when you agree to review a paper, you agree to be unbiased in your comments. And the first step toward doing so is identifying any biases that you may hold. Some common biases and assumptions that may result in a lower confidence in the reliability of a study include the fact that there's a low number of authors, which may indicate to you that there was a low level of collaboration in the work, knowing the author's gender, race, ethnicity, or country of origin, the authors having a dissimilar writing style to your own, or finding grammatical errors in the manuscript. Conversely, some biases and assumptions that may result in a higher confidence in the reliability of a study include an author's institution with a respected reputation, a senior author's reputation as a respected leader in their field, or the fact that a senior author is at a late stage in their career and therefore is likely to be very experienced and would not publish poor science. So once you've identified your biases, you should try to challenge them so that they don't interfere with your ability to write a partial review. And you can do this with a few strategies. First, identify what the bias is and why you have it, and evaluate whether or not it's logical. Add absolute words such as never or always, and then test that statement again to see if it still makes sense once you've added these terms. Reverse the statement and see if it's more accurate or logical that way, or rephrase the statement to include new considerations. So let's use this statement as an example. This senior author is at a late stage in their career. Knowing this makes me feel more confident in the accuracy and reliability of the study. So you may say, I think this because the author is renowned, so bad science would not come from their lab. You would then want to ask yourself, is this always true? Do years of experience guarantee trustworthy data and conclusions? Does their experience mean that they could never improve on their manuscript? You can then reverse the statement and ask, are there situations where years of experience would not influence the quality of the study? For example, perhaps the senior author did not complete the work themselves and may not have had time to review it in depth before submission. You can then rephrase the situation, acknowledging that although years of experience may correlate with accurate and reliable data, in reality, there are many factors that influence a manuscript's need for revision, and that does not necessarily mean that the work is going to be fully accurate. So when preparing to review a manuscript, keep in mind that your goal is to help authors strengthen their paper and assist editors in making next steps about publication. Some important questions to consider include, does the paper identify and properly address an important research question? Does it provide enough context through discussion of previous works? And is the study well designed and executed? Is there data to support all of the claims that are being made? And you want to remember, you may need to read the paper several times in order to prepare a good review. And one strategy would be to use your first read through of a paper to look broadly at all of the sections and evaluate the 4 categories that we discussed earlier, being scope, novelty, quality, and significance. So you can look in the abstract to evaluate if it's within the scope of the journal. Then you can use the introduction to evaluate questions of novelty. So what problem is being addressed and what is the knowledge gap surrounding that problem? And the authors also may address the significance of their study by describing what progress is being made in the introduction. The method section should address the question of quality by telling you if appropriate techniques and tools have been employed. And the results and discussion will again address novelty and significance by describing the advance being made, as well as any limitations to the study. And finally, the conclusion should summarize the significance of the advances that the authors have described throughout the study. Then after your first read through, you can go back and go more in depth through each section. So in the title, abstract, and introduction, do they provide an overview and context for the research being presented? Are the methods clear and easy to follow? Can they be replicated? Was this the best way to answer the research question? Are the results and claims presented clearly and supported by data? Are figures relevant and legible? Are implications examined and put into context through the discussion? In the conclusion, is the research question answered clearly and supported by the results? You should also evaluate the reference list of an article that you're reviewing to see if there are any missing or inappropriate references. In terms of constructing your written review, there are a few good things that a review will contain. First is a summary of the manuscript to demonstrate that you understood the content you were reviewing. Any relevant commentary on impact, appeal, scientific merit, and data quality, any ethical concerns that you found, notes on the presentation of the manuscript, and a final recommendation to the editor. All reviews should be constructive and be written in a professional tone, and you should focus primarily on providing technical feedback or major comments and your perspective on those. And any editorial feedback or minor comments that you have is always welcome and appreciated, but is secondary and should not be the focus of your review. So we'd also like to mention, due to the rising popularity of AI tools such as ChatGPT, there are concerns over how these will impact the peer review process due to a lack of transparency about how these algorithms work and numerous privacy concerns with no guarantee of where or how data is sent or stored in the future. So as such, the AIP publishing and AVS policy is that manuscripts are prohibited from being input to these language models. So once you have returned your review or comments to the editor, they will analyze the reports that they've received and make an executive decision about whether the manuscript will be accepted or rejected or require revisions. Editors rely on the reviewer reports, but their final decisions do not always align with reviewer comments. Please keep in mind, again, you may be asked to review a manuscript a second or a third time after revisions have been made. And in that case, you'll be asked to evaluate whether the author sufficiently addressed your comments from the last version. So to wrap up, again, please only accept to review a paper if you know you have the time. In that case, a suggestion of another reviewer is always appreciated. Advocate for readers when you review a paper, and at the same time, help authors to improve their manuscripts. Always use a professional and collegial tone in your reviews, and if you have any questions, you can always contact the editor or the editorial office for help. So now that we've covered all of that, I will encourage all of you to complete the peer reviewer training assessment that will be distributed after this webinar. And after successful completion of that assessment, you will be flagged in our manuscript submission and peer review system as an engaged reviewer. And that's going to allow our editors to locate and engage with you more efficiently for peer review opportunities, which is why I assume all of you are here today. So just keep an eye out for that. That will be shared after the webinar. And now we're going to hop into our Q&A. So please feel free to put any questions that you have into the Q&A box. I do have a few questions that were submitted before the webinar today, so I'm going to start with those. And let's see, I'm just going to stop sharing so we can see all of our panelists better. Okay, so I'll start quickly. There were a couple of questions related to AVS membership and publication, so I'll get those out of the way. Authors who serve as the corresponding author for an accepted article are given 1 year of gold membership with AVS, which gives you access to the publications library and the technical library, but there are currently no membership benefits or discounts available to reviewers. But we did talk about some of the other benefits that you receive, like credit through your ORCID account and the professional development, of course. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're considering being a reviewer. So the first question that we have for our panel today, we had a lot of questions actually about the qualifications and experience that you need in order to be a peer reviewer, particularly whether PhD students and graduate students can participate. So I'll start by handing this over to E-Ray, I guess. Can you talk a little bit about how you find and select peer reviewers and your opinion on PhD and graduate students in the process?
I can start, or any of the other editors if they want to jump in. So how do we find reviewers? Well, let me just first of all tell you that when a paper comes in, I, as the editor-in-chief in Journal of Vacuum Science and Technology A and B, will select an associate editor with the closest or most appropriate background in the topical area. So already when you do that, the associate editors know of many members of the community in that area who can act as reviewers. But we also use a lot of tools. We go look at, for example, references, see the papers that have been referenced. And so that is sometimes a source for reviewers. We also do searches on our database by keyword. There is actually already suggested reviewers when the paper comes in based on the keywords that you provided. So we might select reviewers from whatever comes up from that database. We also go look at other external databases, Web of Science, look at articles with similar keywords in the title or in the body. And you can imagine that if you do this hundreds of times during the year, I've been doing it for quite a while now, the editorship, you get to basically know in a particular area who might act as reviewers. Then we select a number and ask them to review. Some of them may decline because they might be busy, or maybe we misjudge their expertise, that they'll say, well, I'm not an expertise, for one of the many reasons that Rachel pointed out why people might say no. And then we go to the next reviewer and next reviewer and so on. But typically, AVS community, we're lucky, are very agreeable, and they like to serve for the journal, and we can get reviewers without any problems. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything else.
Thanks, Ira. I think you've covered most of it. I think the only other thing I would say is that authors often suggest reviewers, and that's also helpful.
I was going to say, it may be for that paper, your paper, but more often, at least for me or for some of us, it's for a future paper of yours where you may not have suggested that particular person, or it is for some other paper in the same area. So that's how we get to know reviewers as well.
Yeah, I think the other question was about PhD students and whether they are suitable for to be reviewers. And I think that they certainly are, and it's great training to review a paper, but always pass your review through your supervisor to make sure that you're hitting the right tone and addressing the right points. I think reviewing a paper is actually a very good way to learn how to write a paper.
I was going to say that often senior reviewers will contact us and ask us, do you mind if we involve postdocs or senior students? And that's the best way, actually, is under mentorship and supervision. The PhD students and postdocs do their first few papers, and then you essentially become a trained reviewer that way.
Wonderful. So if you're a PhD or graduate student in the audience today, get in touch with your supervisor. It sounds like the answer. Also, do our assessment at the end of our webinar today, because that will tag you in our system and let our editors know that you're interested in helping out with peer review. Thank you, guys. So we have a few questions in the Q&A box now, so I'll start with one. What motivates AVS's decision to choose a single anonymized model of peer review? From the description, wouldn't a double anonymized review be more ethical / fair? Anyone want to bite?
Who wants to take that one? I will say the following. This is a very hard question. So it's a very fair question. And we continually look at how we do things. But I would say that it's historical. So we've done it single anonymized, but that's not necessarily a satisfactory answer. Just the way that we've been doing it that way, it should be that way going forward. And I can tell you that we're looking at those alternatives.
Okay, thanks a bunch. Next, we have, sometimes I am asked to review an article, but my qualifications fit only one part of the work. Should I say yes or no? Maybe Mohan or Stephanie, if you'd like to give your opinion on that.
I can start and Stephanie can add in. Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. You know, I think if I were in that boat and I received a paper and I don't understand all the parts of the paper, I think I would still feel like I could review the paper. I don't think we're ever really experts on every part of a paper because it's not coming out of our own lab or our own work. I don't think you want to go as far as reviewing papers that are outside of your area that you can't bring any perspective or background to. But I think as long as you feel like you have some part of it that you are knowledgeable about, I think it's fine to learn a little bit more from reading the work. I mean, one example I can give is that, you know, I'm an experimentalist, and sometimes a paper has both experiments and modeling, and I'm not an expert on the modeling part. But again, I would understand enough of kind of the motivation for the work and would have seen enough modeling to be able to say something critical about it and understand it. So yeah, I'll let Stephanie add anything else.
I agree with everything Mohan said. And in fact, he used the example that I was exactly going to use. The only thing I would add is when you do a review, there's comments that go to the authors. And then there's also a box for comments that just come to the editor so that we see, but the authors don't see. So if you didn't feel very confident, for example, in reviewing the modeling part of a paper, you could certainly write that in the box to the editors. Like, this is not my area of expertise. I made some comments, but, you know, just to let us know so that we know how to interpret your review. But I think that's absolutely fine.
That's great. I'll also add, you know, if you're aware of this on the front end of your review, you can always let the editorial office know as well, so that we can notify the editor, and then they can make a decision about whether they want to see if they can get another additional reviewer on the front end rather than waiting several weeks for your review to come in. And that will certainly help our process as well. Okay. So next question, are there opportunities for new potential reviewers to train or practice reviewing a manuscript under the guidance of a more experienced reviewer before being offered an official review opportunity? So that sort of speaks to what you were saying, Alex. I don't know if you have any more perspective on that, or anyone else wants to jump in there.
I don't have much more to say than I already said. I think really that has to be done within your institution. It's difficult, I think, for a journal to organize that.
I will add one more thing. You can send us a request to become a reviewer. Send us a CV so that we know your expertise. If those CVs come from, for example, let's say 4th, 5th year PhD students or postdocs, and you haven't reviewed before, this is a bit of an alternative to having a mentor in your institution. What I typically do is I still send directly reviews, what you're calling official reviews, to senior PhD students and postdocs. However, I might actually ask for more reviewers than I normally would, so that I can compare the reviews with the more seasoned reviews, in fact. Now, that doesn't help you in terms of getting mentorship, of course. It only helps me in my confidence in the review and in the reviewer, because I can then compare it to some other experts and see how they work. Of course, that's also not perfect. But once you do a few of those, then then we gain confidence in our reviewers. So our editors are not passive editors, that we take the reviewers' comments as an advice, but in the end we make the decision. And it's not unusual for us to accept the paper, even though one of the reviewers may have said do not publish or something else, and sometimes even do the reverse and decline the paper, even if the reviewer said accept. We look at the details of the reviews and compare the different reviews to each other and see what they're saying. So anyway, that's what I wanted to add.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see. So this was actually related to a question that we received ahead of time as well, about checking the references in a paper when you're reviewing a manuscript. So this attendee asks, what is the best way to check the references listed in the paper, and how detailed should one get in doing so? Maybe Stephanie, you want to take that?
I'm not sure I understand the question about checking the references.
So just when you're reviewing a paper, looking through the reference list, how detailed should a reviewer get in doing and looking through the references?
Oh, I see. Honestly, what I would recommend is, making sure that influential papers in the field are referenced, sort of foundational papers are referenced, making sure that any statements that, are sort of factual are referenced. I don't think you need to check every single reference for sure. I don't think every statement in the paper has to have a reference. I think most people who read a lot of papers are sort of familiar with the conventions for providing references in the field. So, when I serve as a reviewer, so like on the flip side, when I'm a reviewer, I will look through to make sure that, sort of the literature is cited, right? There are citations to foundational papers. There are citations to sort of recent papers in the field. And typically, I think that's sort of okay. We certainly do not require that authors cite every paper, in a specific field in their papers. I do see that sometimes at other journals, you don't have to cite every paper. I don't know. I don't feel like that was very specific guidance, but it's a little bit, up to your expertise as the reviewer, right? This is why we are asking you for your expertise, right? Do you think that the reference list is sort of complete and, surveying the field and so forth? I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to say.
I want to second Stephanie and also add, I'm not quite sure exactly what you meant by checking, like checking, for example, if the references are right. You don't necessarily have to do that. Although if you see something wrong, that's obvious, you can point it out, or something is missing that didn't allow you to go find the reference. There is copy editing done on all the papers, so if there is anything that's not referenced correctly, they will catch it. I should also say that there is now, with many journals, there is or there will be checks by AI to make sure that the references are not completely out of place. That's something that's ongoing in various publishers, but that's where, for example, something like AI can help and augment the editor's efforts.
Great, thanks. Let's see. How much weight is placed on the final recommendation versus the comments you provide as a reviewer? So if the final recommendation is heavily weighted, do you have any general guidelines for deciding between major revisions or rejection? So I think you kind of spoke about that a little bit, E-Ray, that at least for most editors for AVS journals do really read into the comments that reviewers provide rather than just going based on a final recommendation. But does anyone have any opinion about deciding between major revisions and rejection? Maybe Mohan, if you've got something.
Yeah, this is a good question. And, as an editor, sometimes I'll look at the comments and it might say, reject, but I'll look at the comments and I see that there's actually comments that are constructive that the authors could address and improve or make the paper publishable. And I won't recommend reject. On top of that, you have to remember that we have multiple reviews. So we might get one review that might recommend do not publish, but another one that recommends major revisions. And then we have to sort of weigh, what the overall recommendation will be. So I think the short answer is what Rachel just said, which is that we will look at the comments first, and we won't just go by the recommendation. We hope that the recommendation reflects the comments. So if you have a long list of comments, I think minor revisions might not be appropriate. But besides that, yeah, I think that the comments are the most important, and the recommendation is more, kind of a shorthand version of what we want to see based on the comments.
Anyone else have any input on that? That's a great question.
I would just like to add that in general, we want people's work to be published, right? In general, we aren't sitting here, hoping that we can reject papers, right? And so if we see something where, like Mohan said, if a reviewer says like, do not publish, but if I feel like the majority of the comments could be addressed, that the paper is of interest, I would like to give the authors a chance to address those comments, right? Because in general, we do want people's papers to be published, right? We're in the publishing business. We want your papers to be published. And so, of course, we don't want to publish things that are, not interesting or wrong or, have a major flaw. But in general, we want authors to be published. So.
Great, thank you. Let's see. I can answer this really quickly. What is the typical length of time given to a reviewer to complete a review on a paper? So for AVS journals, that varies anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks is what we ask the turnaround time to be. And, there is some flexibility, but you heard me harp on it quite a few times in my slides. Timeliness is very important for us. We like to give our authors a really good experience by giving them comments as quickly as possible. And that's where you come in as a reviewer. So 1 to 3 weeks is the range of times that AVS journals asks from our reviewers. Let's see, it could happen. So I have seen that the same image is used in 2 different papers published in different journals and different times. How do you consider this as a reviewer?
I also, Rachel, there was one that says, how does one become an editor?
Yeah, I was going to
did
save
that.
that for the end.
Right. Yeah.
You can answer it now, though, if you'd like.
No, I'm actually the last person to answer that because it's been a while. I think Stephanie, Mohan, and Alex could chime in on that.
Okay, we'll come back to that one then. I didn't know, did you want to address the double publication of a figure?
I just want to say it's okay as long as proper credit is given and copyright permissions are taken. Sometimes there's something to be said about making a paper self-contained, that I don't have to go to another paper to see that figure. Maybe there's a point that you're making that wasn't made in that paper, etc. It's okay as long as proper credit is given.
Great, I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's see, how critical can you be on the readability of a manuscript, especially if grammatical errors make it hard to read? Alex, we haven't heard from you in a minute.
Yeah, sorry, I was just waiting. I wasn't speaking because there was a site-wide announcement going on telling me I have to leave the office fairly soon. It is a bit later in the UK. So in terms of the grammatical errors and the readability of manuscript, I think that it's critically important to try and help and guide the authors. I mean, that said, it takes an awful lot of time to go through and list all of those errors, and often that's actually a job of the proofing stage. So you don't have to do all of that, but you should highlight it and flag it, and where there is a lack of meaning or a lack of understandability, that should be highlighted and it needs to be explained. And I think in those cases, if it's unsure what the meaning is due to the English that's being used, then really it's a major revision, because you have to then go back and explain all of that again. So you can be critical. Obviously, you don't be overly negative, but if something's not understandable, you just have to call that out.
Right, thank you. Does anybody else have any opinion on that? I will say, I think hopefully, ideally, if a manuscript was in such a bad state, it wouldn't have made it to you as a reviewer in the first place, because as E-Ray mentioned, that we do a pre-screening of everything before it gets sent out for review. And if something is completely unreadable, it will not be sent out for review. Okay, this is another great question. What are common mistakes that new reviewers make, and how would you recommend avoiding them? Anyone have any strong opinions off the bat? Go ahead.
I spoke a lot, but waiting for somebody else to jump in. But I wouldn't call it a well, maybe it is a mistake. But what we don't like to see, so it is important to remember when you're reviewing, a human being on the other end is reading it. Somebody who put in maybe years of work, maybe a graduate student, maybe it's their first article. So it's important to remember that and be constructive and avoid language that might make them feel not good. I mean, you know exactly, I think, what I mean. And to ask yourself, if I were to get this comment, how would I feel on my paper? So I think I don't know if you call it a mistake, but sometimes reviewers think of themselves as gatekeepers. I think rather than that mindset, think of yourselves as somebody giving constructive criticism. You might end up declining or rejecting the paper, but being constructive on the comments, I think, is important. Being specific in comments is important, so that, you know, think about it. You know, you get reviews back and you look at the review. Okay, what am I supposed to do with that comment? Should not be something that the authors should be asking themselves. They should know exactly what you wanted. So those are the things I can think of. I don't know if my colleagues can think of other things.
I was going to make the same comment. I think sometimes reviewers can have a mindset of, let me try to find what's wrong with the paper. And I think another mindset could be, you know, what are the strengths of the paper? And then what are things that I think could be improved to make the paper better? Stephanie brought this up earlier, that we are trying to publish papers by also improving them so that they get to a level to be published. And I think a reviewer is an important part of that process. So for me as an author, the best reviews I've gotten are ones that pointed out things that helped make the paper better. So if the reviewer can go in with that mindset of, if the paper kind of meets certain levels that you think are, you know, worthy of being published, then what are the feedback that I can give to now improve it to make sure that, you know, when it is published, as many things that are important are addressed as possible. So
I think the only thing, sorry, the only other thing I would add, oh, sorry, Stephanie, I didn't mean to cut across you there. Is, I wouldn't call this a mistake. It's just an oversight. Always remember the scope of the journal, and coming from the Surface Science Spectra journal, where we don't publish necessarily groundbreaking research, we're archiving data that is useful for other people. So our scope is not to publish the most up-to-date work and propound some hypothesis that needs justification. It's to archive useful data. So if someone is reviewing it with a different mindset, they're wasting a lot of time worrying about things that they shouldn't be worrying about.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is, and I don't see this happen too often, but when it does, I think it's very frustrating to authors, is when reviewers make some comments, you know, in the first round of review, they get the paper back, and then they make a bunch more comments that could have been addressed in the first round, right? They're not comments on new things the authors added. They are comments on things that were there the first time that now the reviewer wants to comment on. And I think that's quite frustrating for authors. So if you can, as a reviewer, please try to include all of your comments, you know, in the review so that the authors can address them all in one go.
That's all really great advice. Thank you. And I loved your comments about the scope, Alex. I think especially for SSS, if anybody in the audience is not familiar, if you take a look at our website and the types of things that we publish, I think you'll understand pretty quickly what Alex is talking about. It is very unique. So that's a great point. Let's see, we have another one. I have accepted a role as a reviewer for a paper. Unfortunately, I'm unable to complete it by the due date. May I request an extension? Can I decline the reviewer role after accepting the invitation from the journal? If this is for our journals, sure, please just give us an email and we'll work with you. I think for the most part, extensions are totally acceptable within reason. And I think the main thing to keep in mind is just to reach out as soon as you recognize that there is a problem, just to be respectful to the journal's time and the editor's time and the author's time as well, as I mentioned. Whatever, you know, the journal decides, just let them know as soon as possible. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that, but we had another question that we received ahead of time about selecting peer reviewers from industry. So, you know, they may not be as focused on publishing, so they may not be in our system or referenced in articles that we're receiving. So does anybody have any strategies that they use to try and identify peer reviewers from industry, if you want that perspective when you're reviewing a manuscript.
I think it's the same as most other strategies. It's that you know them because they're in the field and and they express an interest. I would say that most of the industrial folk that I've approached for reviews don't have the time, but they're usually quite straightforward about that and say, no, I can't do this review. But more are welcome for sure.
I think in JVST A and B, a significant fraction, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but just anecdotally, significant fraction is from industry. And I think that's because JVST publishes material that is of interest, in particular to, for example, semiconductor industry. And so, we will select folks from industry, reviewers from industry, and yeah, they might be busy, but certain fraction of them, they do participate.
So again, if you are one of those folks in the audience and you're in an industrial role and interested in becoming more involved in peer review, I would say, again, the best way to do so would be to do our assessment at the end of this that you'll receive, because again, that's going to flag you as interested in the process to our editor, so they can reach out to you. Okay, let's see. We had another question about being constructive when a paper should be rejected in the reviewer's opinion. I think we talked about that a little bit, but does anyone have any more specific guidelines or suggestions for reviewers to give constructive feedback, particularly when they feel like a manuscript should be rejected rather than be returned for major revisions?
I think it depends the grounds on which you think the rejection should be recommended. I mean, if the work is flawed, then there's not much you can do to salvage the paper. But if it's a question of tone or balance or something else, then I think constructively you could suggest reorganizing the paper or placing the emphasis on the parts that are important and de-emphasizing the parts that are not. That takes a lot of time and effort. So I think it goes back to another of the questions. Always make sure you have the time to do the review before you accept. That I've got to the stage in my life now where I get lots of invitations to review, but it's only if I've got a clear 2 or 3 hours do I say yes to anything.
Not a bad strategy. It's realistic. Okay, well, we've covered everything that we've gotten in the Q&A box and received ahead of time. Although we do have a few more minutes if anyone wants to talk about the process of becoming an editor, because that was another question that we received related to peer review. So I know, Ray, you had said maybe Mohan and Stephanie and Alex might have some perspective on that.
I can only speak for myself, and that was, I got tapped on the shoulder by somebody, and so I think that might be the usual way somebody comes and says, "Would you like to do this?" And rather foolishly, I said yes. No, I'm enjoying it enormously.
Yeah, I don't know if it's such a clear answer. I had a similar thing. I mean, E-Ray is the one that tapped me on my shoulder. So I think that you have to kind of, do all the things that kind of go into the background, right? You have to publish papers, create a reputation for yourself, review for the journal. And I think the point is that people will see it and recognize it. And then eventually, I think, you could get selected to be an editor by an editor-in-chief or a journal because they see that you're an expert in an area and you've been doing a lot of good work over the years. So I don't think there's a clear-cut answer besides that.
I agree with Mohan completely.
I was just going to say, although the experience of the people here is being tapped on the shoulder, and there are different avenues that we've taken. So one can do a formal search. So a lot of we're in the family of American Institute of Physics publishing journals. So we have about, I don't know, 32, 35 different journals, Journal of Applied Physics Letters family, etc. So when editors are chosen for those, there is often a formal search where people apply for the position, and then they essentially interview and are selected. But even the applications, you tap people to say, hey, are you interested in applying for that position? So for example, we have one search now at the AVS, and we search for names, people who are potentially might be interested in the position. And then the associate editors basically look at the qualifications of the person. But the other thing I was going to say, this is by no means requirement, but it so turns out that in Journal of Vacuum Science and Technology, a lot of the editors have been Peter Mark Award winners. Peter Mark was, of course, one of the editors-in-chief of JVSTA back in the previous century, and he died prematurely at a young age, and an award was established in his name for young investigators. And so I, as the editor-in-chief, tapped a lot of the winners to be the associate editors. Call it tradition, but or call it sort of a easy way of finding the right people. That's how it's gone.
All right. Well, we don't have any more questions in our Q&A, and it's getting to a pretty good time here. So let's see. Heather has written in the chat, thank you for joining us. In a separate browser, you'll see a page called AIP Publishing's Peer Review Training Assessment. This is the assessment that I've mentioned. So you can please complete that if you're interested in becoming a peer reviewer, and I mentioned you'll receive that via email as well after this webinar. So if we have, can the slides be shared? I'll see about that. We'll see if we can share those. Thank you for your interest though. Actually, we are going to post this webinar online as well. Yeah, that's what Heather's mentioning as well. So this will be available, the recording will be available online, as well as, again, a link to the assessment, so you can complete that at your convenience. And we look forward to seeing you all in our peer review system, tagged as engaged reviewers and helping out AVS publications. So thank you very much to all of our panelists for your time. Very informative and useful perspective and feedback that you've given to us today. So thank you again to all of our attendees, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you.